Okay, so now what we're going to talk about is the way in which you can develop a Bayesian approach in terms of figuring out whether or not something is a match. So let me walk through kind of the conceptual framework, and then we're going to go into the actual technical calculation of how you identify whether something is a match or not. And what you'll see is the way we're going to set up the conceptual framework. I'm going to talk you through how mentally you make decisions about whether something's a match or not. And then we'll talk about a framework, the Bayesian framework, in which you kind of take those mental calculations and transform them into something that can be written down, calculated, and make your life a little bit easier in terms of doing the matching decision. Okay, so take a look at the examples that we have on this slide, and think to yourself, for example, you've got name and address and age. So three pretty common variables that you're going to look at. So the first one, look at the first pair. So you've got John A. Smith of 16 Main Street, age 16. And what you have to do is you want to say, is that the same person as J. H. Smith at 16 Main Street, age 17? So, you kind of look at it, you think, well, the address is the same. Well, maybe they're father and son, so, but one is 16, one's 17, so that's a little bit of information that says they're probably the same person. H and A can quite often be written and confused. So, I think I would look at that and say these are probably the same person. Now, others might disagree. You could say people who say, no, it has to be exactly precisely on every element before I'm going to call it a match. And then others are going to agree with me. So that one, you could say that you're going to look at it and you're going to call that a match. That's the same entity that we're capturing. And now take a look at that second pair. So we got Javier Martinez at 49 East Applecross Road, 33. And then you've got a name that is spelt differently, 49 Applecross spelt a bit differently, and age 36. So now, of course, you can see the human being making some additional calculations. Well, Javier, and the way in which it's spelled, Javier, that could be someone's misspelling. Martinez and Martinez, you could see how someone might misspell that. So I think mentally, human beings might make some correction for that. And then you see East Applecross and Applecross spelt with 2 P's and 1 P. Again, someone might say that could be just typographical error. Then you see 36 and 33, so then you're starting to say, well, that age gap's a little bit far away. So then you think, oh, what time period were these data sets captured? So maybe I'd need some additional information to say it was absolutely the same person or not. But you can see how when you talk through whether they're exact or not, whether these are a match or not, you're kind of pulling the different pieces of information together and bucketing them and making it a decision. So take a look at the last pair. So you've got Gillian Jones and Gilliam Brown. And you've got 2 very different addresses and 2 very different ages. So, you could, again, think about that. Well, Gillian and Gilliam could kind of be the same person. It's a woman's name, so Jones and Brown still could be the same person. Then you're kind of starting to get into a messy thing because you've got 2 different ages, 2 different addresses, so you'd really need to have a lot more additional information before you started calling it a match or a non-match. So I think those are the motivating examples that you should think about. And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually start to look at very specific examples associated with businesses. And before we go there, think about all the ways in which data are messy. So in the example that you've got here, you've got different ways in which people's names are written. You've got different suffixes and so on. So you've got John Smith and John Smith. So John Smith with the first letter capitalized versus the entire name capitalized. Now, a computer is not going to realize that those are two different things. So one of the things one has to do is one has to do a whole lot of standardization to make sure that the two files have the same format. So either it's all caps or all lowercase, whatever the system is, you're going to want to make sure that they're comparing the same thing. Then you're going to want to have what's often called a lookup table. So Charles and Chuck. In American English, those are the same names. So you kind of want to have a lookup table which tells the computer Charles and Chuck are the same name, John and Jack are the same name, Javier and Javier are the same name. So you kind of have all the possible ways in which that name could be spelled. Then you see Dr. John Smith and John Smith III. So a lot of the pre-processing packages, what they do is they take off that last thing, the third, they take off the honorific or the title of doctor, and they just get to the core of the name. And then you'll see other things. You'll see A.M., A period, M period, or Anne-Marie. So the computer needs to be told that those could be the same thing. You'll also see then when you start to look at street names that there are also lookups. So you've got road, drive, and so on. Street names can be actually quite difficult because you can have the same street having different names. So for example, in Washington, D.C., Route 4 is also Pennsylvania Avenue. So you need to have a lookup table that tells you that that the names of those streets are the same. Another thing that's going to get you is the way in which your data is displayed. So American English and British English have dates in different orders, and so you need to make sure that you standardize on that. And quite often what makes the most sense is when you do your cleaning and your blocking, that you actually pass out the pieces parts into their smallest subunit. So you're going to match, for example, just on the date of birth, match on the month of birth, match on the year of birth. Have those as three separate matching units because you're going to run into less trouble that way. And then, of course, you've got different ways in which a state will be written. North Carolina spelled out, NC, or perhaps FIPS codes. So the pre-processing is a lot of dirty work, requires a lot of looking at the data, understanding the different files and standardizing. Now, of course, one of the challenges in much of what we do, we're looking at sensitive, confidential microdata. So one of the very big challenges that we have, and I'm a passionate advocate of this, obviously, since I spent my career promoting access to confidential microdata, is that data might not match simply because not enough people have had access to the way in which the data was standardized and the decisions that were made about whether something is a link or not. So quite often you'll see companies come in and say, we have this matching algorithm, we're going to apply it to your data, and we're going to give you a unique identifier for everyone in the data set. I would be very careful about that because, as you're going to see, the decisions that are made, this is an art more than a science, and the decisions that are made can have very strong negative effects in terms of resource allocation, whether you over-engineer a name or whether you under-engineer it. The level of precision that's chosen can have significant effects on what's done. So I think a major challenge of our time is how do you provide access to confidential data, and why do we know so little about these processes? And one of the reasons is the privacy and confidentiality. Obviously in this course we spend a lot of time talking about privacy and confidentiality later on, but essentially people are very sensitive. This survey in the European Union spells out kind of what the people are very sensitive about, and one of them is obviously your personal identification number and your social security number. So let's walk through how we're going to take that verbal discussion of I know Chuck and Charles are the same, I know Javier and Javier are probably the same. Let's walk through how we're going to operationalize that and tell the computer how to assign some probabilities to help us make decisions. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to walk through two files. One is a transaction level file for government contractors called sam.gov, and then the other is going to be a small business administration file. And it's quite reasonable that the government wants to know how many of our contracts are going to small businesses. So assume that that's the question that's being asked. In order to do that, we'd want to match the files on a business by business level, the small business administration file with the SAM government contractor file. So let's walk through that example. Obviously we're just going to take a small case here, but we're going to walk through how that works. So if you take a look at the first one, which is transactional spending, you'll see, first of all, the first variable is the index, then the name, the address, and then the city. And what we've done is, we're going to in a minute block in on the city itself, but you can see when you look through, the first line says the recipient is Pro Pharmacy Inc., then the next two are LSI Industries Incorporated, and then you go down into different things. So just taking a look at that, you'll see that the second and third transactions are exactly the same entity. Now, I should say the pre-processing on these data sets has been done before we're showing it here. There's no point in going through making sure that Chicago and Chicago are spelled exactly the same way. We've already done that for you. But you take a look at that, and it's pretty clear that index 42449 and 69599 are the same entity. So if you were thinking about unduplicating, you'd just collapse those two, and that the others are different. And then you take a look at the next one. So we've got now Small Business Association data. And you look at this, you've got American Metal Manufacturing Inc., Jennison Integrated Solutions, and so on. And so now the operating question is, which of these entities are the same entity? In other words, just a reminder, how many small businesses show up in the government vendor file?